The restaurant was a cozy, dim cocoon of expensive wood and muted laughter. Julia, my wife, was across the table from me, yet she felt 1,000 miles away, her attention caught by the waiter who'd just delivered our wine. Mark. He wasn't overtly handsome, but there was a confident, easy grace to him, a stark contrast to my own anxious, tailored formality. Mark leaned in to describe the vintage, and in the low light, a stray strand of his dark hair fell near her shoulder. Julia, usually reserved, didn't pull back. Instead, as he reached for the empty bread basket, his knuckles brushed the inside of her wrist. The contact was so brief, so accidental, or was it, that I almost missed it? But I saw the immediate, electric jolt that ran through her. Her breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. My own heart, usually a steady drum, gave a sudden, panicked double beat. Mark looked up, and his gaze, dark, steady, and utterly unfazed, met mine for a split second before returning to Julia. He didn't apologize for the touch, he simply held her eyes, a question hanging in the charged silence. Julia's cheeks, normally pale under the candlelight, bloomed a soft, stunning rose. She laughed, a small, spontaneous, breathy sound I hadn't heard from her in months, and playfully swatted his arm. "Oh, you!" she whispered, her voice husky. It was the kind of intimate, genuine teasing I used to share with her, back when our marriage was new. Mark's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile, the kind that promised both mischief and understanding. He lingered for a moment too long, letting the warmth of their unexpected closeness settle over the table, suffocating me. "Enjoy your evening," he finally murmured, his eyes still holding hers for a final, intense beat before he retreated. Julia watched him go, a dreamy, faraway look softening her features. When she finally turned back to me, the smile, that truly incandescent, unguarded smile, faded instantly, replaced by the familiar, polite pleasantness she reserved for public outings. I opened my mouth to ask her about the wine, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't want to talk about the wine. I wanted to ask her why the touch of a stranger had ignited a light in her that my presence hadn't been able to spark in years. As she raised her glass to her lips, I noticed she hadn't touched the sparkling water I'd poured for her, but the place on her wrist where his skin had met hers was now faintly, impossibly, flushed pink. What was happening between them, and how deep did that accidental touch really go? Julia finally took a sip of the red wine, her eyes distant, still tracing the path Mark had taken across the floor. "It's good," she said, her voice flat, breaking the heavy silence. "Very bold." "Is it?" I tried to match her casual tone, but my hand was shaking slightly as I reached for my own glass. I knew the wine was irrelevant. What was bold was the look that had passed between her and that waiter, a flicker of recognition that felt like a betrayal. For 10 years, I, David, had provided everything: the beautiful apartment, the successful career that paid for this very restaurant, the stability she'd claimed she wanted. But stability, I now realized, was just another word for stagnant. We hadn't truly seen each other in maybe 5 years. Our conversations were logistics, bills, work schedules, upcoming events. The last time she looked at me with that raw, genuine spark, we were packing boxes into our first tiny apartment, promising each other the world. The cracks in our foundation had been widening slowly, imperceptibly. I craved her spontaneous passion, she craved something I wasn't. Lately, our intimacy had become a duty, marked by her hurried movements and the relief in her eyes when it was over. My hidden desire was simple: to be her hero again, the man who could make her laugh without effort. Her unspoken truth, the one that stung my gut, was that she was lonely, even when I was right there. As we ate, I watched her. She was beautiful, her dark hair catching the candlelight, but the smile she gave me when I asked about her day was rote, programmed. I felt a cold knot of dread tightening in my chest. Then Mark reappeared. "Is everything to your liking, madam?" he asked, not quite looking at me. His proximity was sudden, a low-pressure friend moving in. "Perfect, thank you," Julia replied, her posture instantly straightening. As he leaned over to clear my empty water glass, his sleeve brushed her arm again. This time, I noticed Julia's hand, resting on the white tablecloth, reflexively curl into a gentle fist. The air crackled. It was a minuscule gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the energy passing between them. He didn't say anything more, he simply paused, his dark eyes meeting hers for a beat that stretched into an eternity, a tiny, charged moment that felt hotter than a summer sun. It was an illicit conversation conducted entirely without words, a language I was locked out of. I cleared my throat hard. The steak is excellent, Mark. I cut in, my voice sharp. Mark finally turned to me, his expression neutral, but his eyes held a strange, knowing intensity. I'm glad, sir. Is there anything else I can get for the lady? Julia shook her head, but her gaze lingered on his. No, thank you, she murmured. As he walked away, she let out a slow, steady breath, the kind you take after holding it for too long. I suddenly understood. The tension wasn't just my imagination. They were both actively trying to control the powerful pull between them. It was a dangerous, captivating dance. 1 step closer, 2 steps back, all under my nose. I was watching my wife fall for another man, and the terrible part was, I couldn't look away. I had to know where the secret, intoxicating attraction would lead. The main course finished, and the polite facade was cracking, revealing the raw, ugly truth underneath. Mark returned to offer dessert, but I waved him away with a curt shake of my head. No, thank you. Just the check. Julia didn't argue, but her disappointment was a palpable thing, settling like a fog over the table. David, what is wrong? She asked, her tone shifting from polite disinterest to defensive sharpness. Nothing. I lied, my jaw tight. I picked up my wine glass, emptying it in one gulp. Just ready to go home. What I really wanted to say was, stop looking at him like that. Stop breathing differently when he's near you. Do you even remember the last time you looked at me that way? My jealousy was a hot, bitter taste on my tongue. It wasn't just his confident presence. It was the way he effortlessly elicited a response from my wife that I, her husband, could no longer access. I longed to reach across the table, grab her hand, and drag her out, away from his orbit, to remind her that she was mine. But the very thought felt desperate, pathetic. Julia's eyes narrowed, seeing right through my thin composure. You're being ridiculous, she hissed, leaning closer. He's the waiter. He's clearly more than just a waiter to you. I countered, the words slicing out before I could stop them. I saw the flash of guilt, and something else, something like furious temptation, in her eyes. Just then, Mark reappeared, holding a small, silver tray with the bill. He placed it silently near my hand. As he did, his sleeve briefly snagged on the delicate bracelet Julia wore. He paused, his focus entirely on her wrist. Sorry, let me fix that, he murmured. Instead of simply unhooking the fabric, he gently ran his thumb over the cool metal of the bracelet. The touch was lingering, intimate, a boundary not just crossed but utterly dissolved. Julia didn't pull away. She just stared at him, her lips slightly parted, her breath shallow. My knuckles were white against the tablecloth. I felt a violent urge to slam my hand down on the table, to demand respect, to demand her attention. But I just watched, trapped, as an undeniable heat radiated between them. The longing in Julia's eyes, a bold, undeniable hunger, was a knife twisting in my gut. It was a silent admission, she was ready to give in to this forbidden energy. Mark finally lifted his gaze from her wrist to her eyes, his expression a promise, a challenge. The unspoken question was clear, what are you going to do about it? I snatched the bill from the tray. Let's go, Julia. Now. She didn't move immediately, her gaze still locked on Mark. He gave her a final, almost imperceptible nod, a silent agreement, a shared secret. Then, he straightened, his expression instantly professional, but the tension he left behind was a thick, humming wire between us. As we stood up, the chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing a few glances. Julia was stiff, radiating anger and frustration. You've ruined the evening, David, she bit out as we walked toward the exit. Did I? Or did he? I retorted, keeping my voice low and dangerous. We reached the coat check, a small, recessed area near the back exit. The attendant was momentarily gone. It was dark, shielded from the main dining room by a heavy velvet curtain. We were suddenly, shockingly alone. Julia turned on me, her eyes blazing. You need to stop projecting your insecurities onto me. My insecurities? I saw the way you looked at him, Julia. I saw the way he touched you. Before she could answer, the small storage room door right beside the coat check opened. Mark emerged, holding a bucket of ice, his face impassive. He hadn't seen us yet, hidden in the shadows of the curtain. He placed the bucket down and leaned against the wall, pulling out his phone. He looked tired, vulnerable, completely off guard. Julia's gaze was immediately drawn to him. Her anger toward me dissolved, replaced by that mesmerizing, unguarded longing. It was a physical ache to see her watch him like that. He lifted his head, his eyes scanning the space, and he saw her. The air caught. Mark put his phone away slowly. He didn't move toward us, but the space between them seemed to shrink to nothing. Julia took a small, involuntary step forward, her hand reaching out for the velvet curtain, as if to steady herself. The light was just right, illuminating the sharp, hungry desire in her face. The silence was absolute, a powerful, deafening force. Then, he finally moved. Not toward me, not toward the coat check, but directly toward her. His hand reached out, not to touch, but to gently pull the curtain aside, revealing her fully, as if challenging her to step out of the shadows. His eyes held an irresistible, electrifying invitation. He leaned in, his voice a low, resonant murmur that just barely reached our hiding place. "I get off in 10 minutes," he whispered. Julia's eyes flickered to mine, a millisecond of terror and guilt. Then, she looked back at Mark, and I saw her make her choice. Her lips parted, and she opened her mouth to speak, to answer his forbidden offer. What would she say? Would she choose her marriage, or the intoxicating promise of a stranger? My breath hitched, waiting for her answer, bracing for the inevitable, soul-crushing confirmation of my fears. Julia's gaze was locked with Mark's, a silent battle raging in the space between them. Her hand, still gripping the velvet curtain, trembled. I could feel the tension radiating from her, a mixture of fear, longing, and a terrifying freedom. Then, she swallowed hard. "Mark," she began, her voice a shaky whisper, barely audible over the sudden, frantic pounding of my own heart. He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers, drawing her into his orbit. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, stale wine, and the undeniable, electric charge of forbidden desire. He reached out, his fingers brushing her arm, a feather-light touch that nonetheless sent a jolt through her entire body. Julia visibly shivered, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief, agonizing moment. "Julia, don't!" I wanted to scream, to pull her back, but the words were lodged in my throat, choked by a cocktail of panic and disbelief. I was a ghost in my own marriage, watching it crumble before my eyes. She opened her eyes, and they were wild, luminous, reflecting the reckless abandon of a woman on the precipice of something life-altering. She started again, her voice barely a breath. The words were hanging in the air, suspended, poised to shatter everything. Just then, a loud, booming laugh erupted from the main dining room. A group of boisterous businessmen, clearly well into their celebration, spilled out toward the exit, heading directly for the coat check. Mark's hand dropped from Julia's arm as if burned. The spell was broken, the dangerous intimacy instantly shattered by the unwelcome intrusion of reality. His face, which had been so openly vulnerable, snapped back into the carefully constructed mask of the professional waiter. Julia, too, flinched, pulling back into the shadows of the curtain, her face a mask of disappointment and frustration. "Evening, Mark!" one of the men jovially slurred, clapping him on the back. "Great service as always!" Mark offered a polite, practiced smile. "Thank you, sir. Glad you enjoyed it." As the group moved past us, collecting their coats, Julia and I remained frozen. The moment, so ripe with possibility, had evaporated. When the last of the men had exited, Mark turned back to us. But the fiery invitation in his eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded neutrality. He merely nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. He had offered, and she hadn't taken it. The moment had passed. Julia's shoulders slumped. She looked at me then, her eyes devoid of the passion and longing they'd held for Mark, replaced by a dull, aching resignation. She had been on the verge of choosing, and she hadn't. Or perhaps she had, and fate had simply intervened. "Let's go, David," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. She grabbed her coat, not even meeting my gaze. We stepped out into the cold night air, the restaurant's warmth suddenly feeling suffocatingly fake. I hailed a cab, the silence between us heavier than ever. But as we drove away, I looked back at the glowing entrance of the restaurant. And there, standing just inside the doorway, was Mark, watching our cab disappear into the traffic. His gaze wasn't on me. It was fixed on Julia's side of the car, a look of profound, secret understanding on his face. He knew what had almost happened. And more terrifyingly, so did Julia. The affair hadn't been exposed, the confession hadn't been made, but the choice, the temptation, was now a raw, bleeding wound between us. The climax hadn't exploded, but it was hovering, a dark cloud on the horizon. The taxi ride home was a suffocating tomb. Julia sat pressed against the far door, her profile rigid and unyielding. The silence was an active combatant, heavy with everything left unsaid and everything that had nearly been done. I paid the driver, and we walked into our pristine, sterile apartment, a space that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated cage. She dropped her purse onto the polished entryway table with a resounding thud. "Don't," she warned, seeing the desperate look on my face. "Don't say anything." "I have to," I insisted, the control I'd maintained all night finally snapping. The fear, the jealousy, the absolute humiliation, it all burst out of me. "I saw it, Julia. I saw the way you looked at him. You were going to leave with him." She flinched as if struck, turning to face me. The resignation was gone, replaced by a devastating, raw pain. "And wouldn't that have been easier?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Wouldn't that have finally forced us to admit that we are drowning here? That we haven't been happy in years?" Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time that night, I saw the genuine person underneath the polished facade. "You have no idea how lonely I am, David," she sobbed, throwing her hands up in a gesture of absolute defeat. "He saw me. In that brief, stupid moment, he saw me. And I smiled. I smiled like I hadn't since." She trailed off, unable to voice the date of our marriage's demise. The confrontation wasn't about Mark anymore, it was about the ruin of us. I felt my own defenses crumble. I walked toward her, not in anger, but in utter exhaustion. I didn't reach out to touch her, knowing any physical comfort would be rejected. "I know," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "I know I haven't seen you. I've been so focused on building this perfect life, this perfect apartment, this perfect financial safety net, that I completely stopped building us. I stopped seeing the woman I married." I paused, taking a shaky breath. "When I saw you smile at him, Julia, that was the worst pain. Because I realized I never thought I'd see my wife smile like that, just not for me. That line, raw and honest, seemed to punch the air out of her. She stopped crying, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. She saw the true consequence of her almost betrayal reflected in my broken face. "I wasn't going to go with him," she whispered, though the conviction in her voice was weak. "But I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to." The bold decision came not from running away, but from staying. We stood in the ruins of our perfect life, exposed, vulnerable, and completely exhausted. There was no more pretense. We had hit rock bottom. And in that terrifying, honest silence, something shifted. The attraction, the tension, was no longer external and illicit, it was internal, the desperate, fearful pull of two people who had nearly lost everything but still remembered the promise they'd made. The final romantic ending wouldn't be a passionate embrace, but a choice, to start over, seeing each other for the first time in years. The air in the apartment was heavy, but the destructive storm had finally passed. Julia stood before me, her tears slowing to silent tracks on her cheeks, her expression no longer defensive, but simply weary and heartbroken. The perfection of the apartment now mocked us, highlighting the emptiness inside. I took a final, tentative step closer, bridging the physical gap that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. This was the moment of decision, the true climax of our story. Would we turn away and walk into separate lives, or would we choose the harder path, the path back to each other? I didn't try to kiss her or hug her. Instead, I reached out and gently cupped her face in my hands, wiping away a stray tear with my thumb. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, devoid of the possessiveness and jealousy that had consumed me earlier. "I don't blame you for wanting to," I admitted softly, looking deep into her eyes. "You were looking for the spark that I let go out. We both did. But when you look at me now, Julia, what do you see?" Her gaze searched mine, not for a hero, or a provider, or a monster, but for the man she had married. She took a shuddering breath. "I see the fear," she whispered. "The fear of losing me. And I see the man who still remembers how to be kind. I am right here," I said, my voice barely above a plea. "The man who fell in love with your messy, passionate, spontaneous heart. The one who built this life for you, even though I forgot to build it with you." I confessed a final, terrifying truth. The only thing more painful than watching you smile at him was realizing that I would still rather have your broken, imperfect presence than a perfect life without you. She leaned into my touch, a slow, hesitant movement that felt more intimate than any hurried kiss. She reached up and covered my hands with hers, anchoring us both in the moment. "It's going to be hard, David," she murmured, her voice raw. "We can't just erase tonight, or the last 5 years." "I know," I agreed, a faint, genuine smile finally touching my lips. "But for the first time in a very long time, we are actually here. Not side by side, but face to face." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the old, familiar light, the one Mark had briefly ignited, but one that was always inherently hers, was shining again, focused solely on me. It wasn't the fiery passion of a new affair, but the deep, warming glow of a shared history and a renewed commitment. "I want to see you smile like that again," I whispered. "But for me. And I promise you, I will work every single day to earn it." Julia nodded, a tearless smile finally emerging. It was small, fragile, and utterly real. "Okay, David," she said, her voice steady. "Let's start by ordering pizza and talking about something that isn't the mortgage." The tension didn't vanish entirely, but it transformed. It became the tension of two people choosing to fight for something valuable, something nearly lost. We stood there, hands clasped, in the middle of our perfect, silent apartment, realizing that the greatest attraction was the bond that had weathered the storm. The romantic closure wasn't a sudden fix, but a deliberate, tender commitment to look at each other again, really see each other, and rebuild a love that was now, finally, honest.